Well, Coach, this has been great so far. I think a good time for us to move on to. It does actually lead nicely into our next start sub-sit question, because this next one is the theme is about shot selection and the conversations about shot selection with these three different types of players that you likely have on your roster. So the start would be the most difficult conversation to have. The sit would be the easiest one to have. Okay. So start, sub, or sit in the way of shot selection. The first one is the good player or one of your best players that has the green light. So the conversation about shot selection with your better players. The second option is an emerging, younger, talented player. So someone that's young, doesn't quite have the green light cachet that the first one does, but you want to develop. And the last one is the conversation with more of your role players. Someone you need on the floor, is going to help you win, but it's not one of those guys that's going to shoot a lot. So start, subset, the most difficult conversation.
Yeah, the most difficult is always with the role player. At the high school level, because they want to prove themselves. They want to work their way out of being a worker. They want to be seen as the finisher to your coach. Hey, coach, I can do this. I can make these shots. Well, prove it to me then. We see, again, there's not a science to it. I wish I was more organized where, I've used apps before where they track shots and things of that nature. There's, places they go and shoot and they track all their shots. But really, I have to see it in practice. I have to see it in the context of a 5-on-5 within what we do. So those opportunities don't come that often for them because, we might only scrimmage 20 minutes out of a 2-hour practice, right? And they might only get a shot or two in that situation. So those are always the hardest ones. And then sub would be, the emerging young talent. This year, after 7 years, I finally have a player that's a certified D1 basketball player who already has an offer as a freshman. So he thinks he should be shooting every shot, And I'm like, no, you have to earn these shots. And so, but those are, again, easier to have when you have senior leadership, so that it's not just coming from me, but there's some, peer pressure and senior, peer pressure as well. And then the easiest one is always the green light. I mean, you trust that guy, and I think in the high school programs, you've seen that kid who is in the morning, putting shots up on the shooting gun, and you see that translate in practice and games. And so, yeah, that's always the easiest one. And the difficult conversation is always then with the parents, who come back and say, how come Josh has a green light and my son doesn't? Well,
I guess not one of these in specific to start, but really how you slowly and surely throughout the season make it known to the entire group where the shots should come from the types of players that we just talked about. Because, there's the blow the whistle when they take that shot in practice and in front of everybody say that's not the shot, or take them off to the side and have a personal conversation. Like, how do you talk to your team about shot selection, both individually and as a group?
Yeah, and all of that, I think it looks different in the beginning of the season versus middle of the season, like where we're in right now, where we have enough data to point to things, and then to the end of the season. And then it comes down to who we're playing, right? Our matchups and where we want to exploit those matchups and coming to a player and saying, hey, you've historically only taken 4 shots up to this point. This particular game, I need you taking 8 shots. We had a guard this year who's, really good. Carson Reno, who, I'm trying to see if he might be a Chapman player one day. He aspires to it. I think he's close, but, not. You guys are really good. So he's teetering there. Well, it was a dumb part on me as a coach to try to turn him into a point guard when he's a shooting guard. And so there was stretches last year where he would go through a game and only take 3 shots. And so for him, we got to a point where we said, every game you had to take 6 shots or 7 shots. And I had an assistant coach who would track those things. And in the third quarter, he would go to Carson and say, hey, you've only taken 2 shots up to this point. So I think that's a volume question, how many that you should shoot. And then the other piece is, again, I think it comes back to that what my, one of my coaching friends in our state said, that we run our stuff and kids know their role, and they see that by the time we get to league. So I don't mind a really tough off season. Originally when we were going to interview, I think we were 2-8.
Yeah.
We were 2-8, and now we're 4-9. So we're a little bit better, but not that much. So I think for us, it's this part of the season, we've played all the best teams, and we have enough of data set to say, these are the shots you struggle with. We have huddle assist, we don't have, but we have huddle assist where it breaks down, after a game, every shot they've taken. So we can go back and look at those. And so that's a really powerful tool in terms of shot selection. And then we can talk about what it's going to look like moving forward. Because league play is completely different, as you guys know. When you get scouted, when you get certain shots that even, that your best player is accustomed to having, and that's taken away, well, then what's our second best option? What's our third best option?
Coach, my quick follow-up is I want to go back to the volume discussion you mentioned of kind of setting shot, or not limits, but telling a player or having a goal in mind that you want a player to maybe get 6 or 7. How much will that influence maybe then your play calling? Do you keep that number in your head and think, let's try to run whatever this play a couple of times to get him a shot? And then on the other side of the coin, is there a danger in telling your player how many shots you would like him to take or expect him to take?
Yeah, absolutely dangerous, right? So, it comes down to the kid. Who there are kids, and you guys know this, and you've had teammates who come back and they know exactly how many shots they've taken. Right. Yeah. So if you give them that number and they're at 6 and it's the last possession and they're like, I got to get to 7, that's a dangerous place to be. I think what's better, maybe I should have reframed it more like you give them a range.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So you give them a 6 to 8. I don't know if that's a big enough range. Maybe it's 6 to 10. 10 is on the high end. That means you're really cooking that night.
Yeah.
Versus 6. But yeah, it's something that we really tried recently, and it's something that we only really try with certain players.
Yeah.
And fortunately, I haven't had a player yet where I go up to him and say, hey, we don't need you to hit 18 attempts every night. I haven't had that, so that's been good. Knock on wood, maybe I'll get a green light and, one of these days be fortunate to have a kid. I want taking 20 shots a game, but
sure,
not quite there yet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And my last follow-up is just to kind of sum up this shot selection. Will you use play design and play calls early in the season to also kind of let the guys know who you want taking shots? As far as, well, maybe you're running, guys might pick up, hey, we're running a lot of this play for this guy to come off the stagger. Are you cognizant of that at all, of calling plays for certain guys maybe early and often?
Yeah. This is more of an evolution. This is my personal evolution as a coach, over the last 7 years. When I would work with USA Basketball and I would come back and Coach Showalter ran we called it 20. It was a side ball continuity offense that, you'd seen Gonzaga run with the side pick and roll, roll replay, ball gets swung to the other side. And so, you run motion like that and where you're getting your shots, right? We had a conversation recently with our junior national team where, even for Coach Sharman White, who was a head coach, and he found himself with the 24-second FIBA shot clock. They ended up running a lot of basically cutthroat, couple of turns, an action or two, and you have to go because you got the shot clock.
Yeah.
All right. So in those circumstances, maybe the shots that you're getting are more random than if you're running a side pick and roll continuity. For me, myself also, I've evolved over the last 7 years where the ball is in their hands a lot more. I'm essentially running cutthroat. So it's very random.
Okay.
And so it's, you want to get old quick, right? You hear coaches saying that all the time. Well, when I was sitting on the bench at University of Portland for 2 years, like a team that was impossible to scout was BYU. I mean, these dudes, they just looked like they were playing like noon pickup ball with each other.
Yeah.
And so that's my, ambition by the end of the year. This is a little dangerous as well, I'm open to my players surprising me. So what I really learned 2 years ago was my most prolific player at the end of the season was not a guy that was that prolific at the beginning of the year. This young man, Casey Graver, in his last high school game scored 28 points. He hadn't scored 28 points in his entire life. But on the highest stage, biggest pressure, this kid just, within the context of our free flow, the game's always there to be taken, right?
Yeah.
So I think leaving room for that individual who has heart, who is ready for that moment, and he sinks to the level of his training in that moment and says, I'm taking the shot because I see all the lanes that are open now. I can make the read. And it was a revelation for me. And so, you might see that occasionally in the NBA finals where some role player that you didn't expect all of a sudden scores 20 and a Bobby Portis comes out of nowhere and the Bucks
right.
Win, right?
Yeah.
Those are really neat moments as a coach, because you think you have a certain script or a story that's being ready to be told. But the beauty of coaching high school basketball is you never know what you're going to get from an 18-year-old. You live die by it. Fortunately for me, my job security isn't based on that, right? And that's what's so hard for our peers at the Division I world. Their job security and their livelihood is dependent on the whims of an 18, 19, 20-year-old.
Right.
But for me, the discovery of it and that moment when you see a player who's figured it out, at that moment, a win or a loss is what it is. But as a coach, that's the win for me, that they put it all together and they have these moments that, again, they'll remember for the rest of their life.